what's really funny is that every single time we do this, we have one of our soloists singing when it's a movement where the soloist sings and then the chorus entrance. Every time they miss their entrance because they hear the singer like
they're mesmerized.
They're mesmerized, and then I point out, get this. I'm like, okay, getting ready, and nothing because they're just listening to the singer. Like, how does one voice, how does one person make that kind of sound?
Hi everyone. Welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meyer. This is Braveheart, and on today's episode, Serena and I talk to Ernest Richardson and Barron Breland. Yes, it is time to talk Choral Collaborative. This program is one of a kind in the country. It brings together 350 high school choir students, at least 350 students, with the Omaha Symphony to perform a choral masterwork or two every November. We talk about, assembling your own perfect mass. We talk about getting the kids to go past silly and lean into vulnerable and profound, and having faith in the big projects, even when you know it's a really heavy lift. We're so glad you're here. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Sorry for Braveheart's butt shots, and enjoy. Thank you so much for being here. Are you comfortable? You're both leaning forward in a way.
Are we supposed to be cash?
Well, you can't.
Well, the couch is a little...
You can't really be casual on this couch because it'll eat you.
Yes.
But is this okay? Will this work for the... Okay. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Ernest Richardson, resident and principal Pops Conductor of the Omaha Symphony.
Barron Breland, sometimes chorus master for the Omaha Symphony.
Serena Royton, assistant conductor of the Omaha Symphony.
And everyone knows who I am because I talk too much. Okay, this is a very special episode of Omaha Symphony Backstage. And we especially wanted to get this in before this weekend because Choral Collaborative is the only program of its kind in the country. And we usually start our interviews off in a slightly different way, but I'm curious, when was the first time you heard vocal music? Was it at home or was it on with the concert hall or in church? Like, where did you first get acquainted with that?
Well, for me, it was at my church. My father is a violinist and a conductor, and so periodically he would do concerts at our church with full orchestra and chorus. And so ever since I was in, I guess probably about fourth grade, I was hearing concerts there with chorus and orchestra.
Like real major, it's all real music.
Major choral works,
okay.
Yeah. Most of the great symphonies that I know and great choral works I know started off at that church with my dad conducting.
How about you?
So for me, I'm small town from the South, so also the church, but absolutely no masterworks of any type. And I don't believe there was fiddle in our service. But so I grew up singing in church choirs, but wasn't necessarily trained as a singer until I joined the Atlanta Boy Choir. And that was where I remember my first choral orchestral masterwork. And it was Mahler 8 with Robert Shaw. So
Wait.
So that was my first exposure to choir.
Just start right at the top,
at
the apex.
Couldn't do anything else with my life after that. I mean, kind of.
Have you been disappointed since?
Ever since, no. To an 8-year-old, however old I was, 7, to my world, it was ginormous. I mean, this was a football stadium full of people, even though it was really just Woodruff Art Center, with the Symphony Hall with the Atlanta Symphony. But to my little size, I could not believe that they had built this scaffolding for all these people. I mean, I remember they had, this probably is illegal now, but platforms up on these speakers. So the first thing is organ. Boom. Yeah. And, everyone sort of jumps a little bit. And the conductor, to me, was forever away. Just this teeny tiny little white-haired man forever.
I've gotten to play that piece once, and that is the thing you remember, is the opening E-flat organ.
Yeah.
It like shakes you to your bones. You're like, oh, we can't just sit here and listen. We're supposed to contribute to this huge thing. Okay, my flabbers are gasted. So you couldn't do anything else, and you grew up just like, this is expected. This is what you do. At what point did you, I want to deep dive with you at some point, and that's a whole separate rabbit hole conversation of everything that took you away from being a violinist and a violist and then turned you into a conductor.
The dark side.
At what point did you know that you had to build a choir program like this for high school students. Do you remember that moment?
Yes. Well, first of all, I love choral music. I love vocal music.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started studying voice at Indiana University with an intention not to be a singer, but to be a good conductor of singers, opera, Broadway, choral, whatever. I just loved working with singers. And I started studying actually vocal composition as well. And actually, Barron and I have many similar sort of tie-ins because I worked with Robert Shaw at Indiana University when we did Berlioz' Requiem. And that is when
Small pieces.
I thought, man, this is like the coolest thing in the world. I mean, I've experienced it in the past. But when Shaw came in and started working with the choirs, I was a player, but I asked my guys if I could attend the choral rehearsals with Robert Shaw. And everybody looked at him like, why would you want to do that? Because it's Robert Shaw and it's a Berlioz Requiem. And so they said, well, yeah, I think so. And so then the orchestra people talked to the choral people because, bureaucracy. And they said, okay. So I had a Pentax K1000 camera and I asked if I could take pictures of Robert Shaw and they let me do that. And so I still have these pictures. So he just made it so that I needed to do this kind of repertoire. So that's the big picture thing. When I came to Omaha, it was in the early 90s. So to place it, it was the 2 back-to-back victories of the Huskers. And I wanted to have the orchestra serve this particular community. So I needed to understand what was significant and important to this community. Well, the Huskers, even though in the past 20 years, it's been a disappointment. In those first 2 years, it was very exciting. So I knew that. And then I said, well, what else? What else is unique about Omaha? And everybody kept saying the high school choral programs.
Okay.
There's no place in the country that I had lived, East Coast or in Phoenix prior, where anybody talked about the high school choral programs. So then I started digging around and saying, okay, so which is always the strength? Which program is always a strong program? So my spies came back to me, and it was Bellevue West with Don Reimer. So I called him up and said, I'm the new assistant conductor at the time of the Omaha Symphony. I've heard great things about you and your program. I'd like to come by and visit, meet you, hear your kids, just chat about what could happen. So Don is very proud of the fact that he used movable dole solfege to teach his kids how to sight sing. So the first thing he did is he pulled out their sight singing book and said, we're going to sing for Maestro Richardson. And then boom, and they're all singing, they're all sight reading on solfege. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life. I know, you're looking shocked.
I have never sung, ever, never joined a choir, never did that. I don't even know what movable, I don't know how you do that. I don't understand physically.
Well, you went to IU, didn't you?
I did, but
So take 1, 3, 5, and you go
Okay.
do, mi, so, and you're there. Great.
Okay, okay. So it's the most incredible thing you've heard. You can't believe what you're. Yeah.
Like high school kids sight singing.
Yeah.
Really amazing. So after that, anytime I would go visit with him, it always stopped off, no matter what, with him showing off his kids singing, sight singing on movable dove. So okay. So we were talking, and I said, look, if the end is your kids singing with my orchestra, what would that journey look like? And so he said, well, I only want to do complete works. Okay. So what complete work would you want to do first? And so I think it was Vivaldi Gloria. It could have been Vivaldi Gloria or Schubert Mass in G, but I feel like it was Vivaldi Gloria, but it was in the early days. So in that situation, we came down there. We had half the service as a rehearsal and the other half as a performance at the high school. And it was so successful, and the kids were so excited about singing with a professional orchestra, and he was so excited about making this possible for his kids, that we began this amazing program back at one school with one guy who really got the vision of what we were talking about. So over the course of the next probably 5 or 6 years, we would expand to the next person. So if you say to It's because Nebraska is very polite, right? So if you say to the guys, so who would you like to work with on this next project? It gives them an opportunity to recommend who they want to recommend and perhaps not who they don't, right? So so he just gradually introduced me to more and more people who could catch this vision. The whole thing requires a team of choral directors who are so committed that they start working in the middle of August and make that the primary focus of their program until the first week of November. Does that even exist? Well, the answer is yes. So why? So the why is not to work with me. The why is to have their kids sing with the Omaha Symphony. It's amazing that the kids can do this, that have this opportunity. And it's amazing that the organization would invest the resources over 20 years to make this possible.
I'm curious, did Don have the background that you two have of, I have heard choir with orchestra, I have heard these masterpieces, my kids deserve to sing these masterpieces. Do you know if he came from that road? Because when you say, what piece would you like to do and what can your kids handle? That's a genuine question you have to answer every single year.
Mm-hmm.
What can high school students with their high school voices prepare in time in a way that won't hurt them, it won't impede their growth, and will give them something that they can feel absolutely unbelievably good about at the end of November, at the end of the run?
Right. All those critical. I think that the first stage of this was that Don had sung some of those pieces, but the school programs weren't set up really for the kids to have an opportunity to do these major works. So he knew of them, and I believe he had sung some of them, but he had never had a chance to prepare them. So that's very common in our choir's experiences. They'll go and they'll get their degree someplace, and maybe they sing one or two pieces with the big college chorale or something like that. But it's not set up where they can study and then teach that music to the kids. And some teachers might not want to do that because there's a tremendous investment of time. But the ones who do gravitate to this program, and strangely enough, in Omaha, there are always a circle of directors who really want to participate in this, whether it's in Latin, it's usually in Latin or often in German, or less often in German, and once in a blue moon in English. And then we do Carmina Burana every 4 or 5 years, and that's in all kinds of different weird languages that resemble Latin and German, but not really. So I think that's it. There's a desire. Certain people have a desire to stretch themselves as teachers into this big repertoire. And those are the people that are going to be interested in it. When you talk about how can they do it in a healthy way, we find teachers and we support teachers who teach healthy singing. So do no harm. And in place of big mature voices, we have a number of voices. So we'll have routinely 350, 400 voices up there, which is a really large chorus. Mm-hmm. But that takes care of the healthy part, that nobody has to sing louder than they can sing to get over the orchestra. And that was a process that we developed. But the other thing that's really important is I know enough about good singing to know when it's not being done, but I don't trust myself in actually teaching the technique of singing. So I have experts like Barron. I can hear something and I'll say, Barron, it sounds like this to me, and I'd like it to sound like this. And so then he will analyze that and then translate that into healthy singing. I've learned a tremendous amount from the 2 chorus masters I've worked with over the past 20 years. Even so, I always defer to them so that we make sure that we're choosing repertoire that's healthy, that's through the teachers, and then executing it in a healthy way, that's with a coach like Barron.
And you're nodding quite a bit because you have choirs that you run and you work with regularly. How do you set that expectation as well, that you're going to rise to the occasion, but you're not going to overdo it?
For the singers?
Yeah.
Well, first off, he's not giving himself enough credit. I am more and more futile in my existence, because he has learned so much that he says all of these things, and he says the translated version, and he's like, now say that in singer speak. And I'm like, you just did. You just took all of my good analogies, took all of my tips and tricks, and now I have nothing else to say. So I say simple things like sing louder. The health is a really critical part of it. And what is really great about the choral programs here in Omaha, especially at the high school level, is that they are really good at balancing all the competing goods that these singers are involved with. So they're not only singing in this project, but like you mentioned, they're doing other things throughout the course of the year. And some of them are in show choir, which is a totally different art form that is sweeping through the high schools. And the choral directors, especially that buy into this project, want their show choirs and their jazz choirs and their swing choirs or whatever they're doing else to come from a foundation of really quality singing. And so when they have those extra programs, they use this project because they not only get to work with us, but they get to work with professional singers. They use that as sort of a building block for the rest of their season and the rest of their curriculum, because now they get all this really wonderful quality singing instruction that supplements what they're already doing. Most of these people are already trained singers. That's what they went to their music ed programs with. And then you just bring in all of this extra help. Now they just have this foundation of healthy singing. In the same way dancers, you can specialize in hip hop, but if you start with a ballet corps, you have all of this range and versatility that you can do. And they're doing that with their singers as well. I think one of the other nuances is some of these kids, as these choral programs are growing or needing more tenor and bass voices, they're pulling in all these tenors and basses fresh out of middle school that aren't tenors and basses yet. I mean, they're needing healthy singing for all kinds of reasons, and one of which is just to help these growing humans figure out, how to navigate their instrument through some critical growth spurts in their lives, tenor, bass, or soprano, alto, that are all just getting older and bigger.
Can we talk about that? Because my vocal knowledge is severely limited, but I do know that there are roles that you wait to tackle until you're older, because that's when you can physically, like your voice has settled into a space where you can physically handle it without hurting yourself. And I imagine what you just said, it's like we have puberty as a consideration, and the human brain doesn't stop developing until you're 26 on top of it. So you have lots of things that you're navigating. So how do you encourage kids to sometimes push through or to work with things that could be otherwise really irritating and difficult?
Well, I think Maestro touched on it a little bit. There's safety in numbers, right? So especially for the male voice transitioning, there's all squeaks and hops and skips in there that are mortifying and terrifying. And but when you're in this big crowd, you can sing through things. And I never had a voice change. So just as someone who started in a boy choir and sang through puberty, my voice just moved. It just sort of sang through healthy singing all the way down. I never had a moment where I was a soprano one day and a bass the next. And a lot of singers that sing through their transition find that that's the case. In the same way, any muscle that's growing, as long as you're working through it as you're headed towards whatever direction, you won't find skips or bumps or rough transitions. So I think that's good, actually, for high school singers to remain singing throughout their body's development. But the solo roles are tricky. I mean, those are for some grown-up singers. There are certainly some opera roles that you're right, that you wouldn't deal with that. The kind of singing in these masterworks is not that kind of singing, at least on the choir side. The soloists have a heavy lift, but the writing for the singers and the choir is not the same writing for the singers in the solo world.
And I do love those moments when we get our soloists in front of our choir, and it's on paper it's 350 versus 1, and then you have a Siri or a Jessica or a Drell or Eric walk out there, and it's like, no, it's not an even chorus.
yeah.
How we pick our soloists very specifically for this project. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. On the first level, each piece that we do requires certain kinds of voices. So this year we're doing Lord Nelson Mass, and that's kind of standard issue bel canto singing. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people that can fit into that. When we do something like Carmina Burana or even Elijah, then you have to find for certain title roles certain kinds of voices that can pull that off. But that's relatively easy to do in the sense that lots of people want to work with orchestras, and really lots of people want to do this particular project, which is a story in itself, which I'm happy to go into. But we find the right voices for the repertoire, but then we go through a kind of interview process where I say, okay, so this is what we're about. And you got two guys here who have given all the metaphors that we can possibly give, plants and everything else. And what we need in the final thing is for them to be able to hear what correct placement sounds like. And we need to have it in low male voices, high male voices, low female voices, high female voices. And you guys need to believe what we believe, which healthy singing is always what we're trying to do, regardless of style. So I go through a process of asking them questions and say, here's a problem I'm hearing in the chorus. How would you solve that technically? And so if they give answers that are consistent with what we try to do, then we know that they're going to be in a good teaching role when we're working with the kids, which is really important. Especially, you can listen to voices, and as you get to work with them, you can feel inside your head and your body what they're doing correctly. You learn to feel like your body actually does that. So the kids need to hear that. Once it's in their ear, it's like us with vibrato. Once we hear something, it makes our hands do that thing. They do weird things until we get it coordinated. But if it isn't in our ear, we can't do it. It's the same thing with these singers. If it isn't in their ear so that they can begin to have their body do what needs to happen, then it's very difficult for them to match it. We talk about emulating, not imitating the adult voice. So it just as a quick thing for your listeners, vocal technique kind of starts down your diaphragm, and there's a tube, right, that goes up your body and then comes out your mouth, and it's resonant all through here. So you have to breathe correctly, and a lot of people don't. And so there's a lot of practice on how do we breathe and support the breath? How do we not kink the hose? How do we raise the soft palate? That's really a challenge. Man, we're in the weeds. That's really a challenge because popular music sings with a clamped down palate. That's the sound they're used to hearing. And you can do that and hear it be recorded, and people can manipulate things and make it work. But what they hear in their popular music is actually anti-singing, I would say. So
is that because it's understood that you will always have a mic, and so you really don't want to be belting into a mic?
Well, it's more there's a 4-mile hike, and there's two ways to do it. One is to take an RV to the end, and the other way is to walk. And a lot of people just take the RV, right? Mm-hmm. So it's lazy singing, but it becomes a style also, which we can teach kids to sing in a healthy way. But the kids who only can do this closed soft palate business can't change it. So we're asking the kids to do a tremendous amount. And the kids either have an adult male or an adult female as their teacher. So half the kids don't know what it sounds like for their gender to sing whatever it is we're talking about. So we bring in sopranos, altos, tenors, basses, so that everybody has a model that they can hear. And it's remarkable. What's really funny is that every single time we do this, we have one of our soloists singing when it's a movement where the soloist sings and then the chorus entrance. Every time they miss their entrance because they hear the singer
they're mesmerized.
They're mesmerized, and then I point out, I'm like, okay, we're getting ready, and nothing, because they're just listening to the singer. How does one person make that kind of sound?
Yeah. It's. I mean, I love that first rehearsal where they get that plus the soloist plus the orchestra.
Plus the orchestra. And they don't sing. The first 10 minutes of my rehearsal, this is never going to work because nobody is singing because they're like, wow, the orchestra. Wow, 2000 seat hall. Wow, soloist. Yeah. And then nobody's singing.
Yeah, they're all just wowed.
Yeah, they're just staring in wonderment. But that's good.
It gets it out of their system, and then by the time Sunday comes around, it's old hat. They've done this before. They know.
Seasoned. They're seasoned.
So seasoned. Okay, that's. I love that happens though in the schools as well. That they have this gobsmacked moment of coming face to face with their first like professional singer.
Well, and you have these big voices in small rooms. They're not in a concert hall.
No.
They're just right there in the classroom, and all of a sudden they let it rip. And I mean, the hair blows back from some of these people's faces. It's cool. It's cool.
How do you, at any point, do our soloists talk to them about potential next steps if they'd like to pursue voice further, or do they keep it to the task at hand?
No, in fact, when they first meet our soloists, the soloists give a quick rundown of who they are, what they do, how they got into the business, what they're currently doing, all that kind of thing. And I always follow up with stories about what the audition process is. What do people on the other side of the table listen for?
Mm-hmm.
And what always happens is I'm never surprised that my guys sing as well as they do. But that first time I hear them sing is also a revelation for me. And a lot of times I'll give the downbeat, they'll sing this beautiful thing, and then I'll stop. Okay, so this is how it is that you choose your singers. You hear this sound, and you're so captivated by the sound that you're wanting to hear what they do as artists, but it's that sound. So I describe to the kids that, sometimes we go to New York and we have a bunch of singers and they sing for us. Sometimes they have a manager who sends us material. They will talk about what their training was, where they went to school. Sometimes we have people who come in who've had a career on Broadway, but they started off as classically trained musicians, which I love, because then it proves the point that you start off with healthy singing and then you can do anything you want. So often we have somebody in the mix that actually has a career as a Broadway singer.
I mean, Siri Howard is our example this year, where she is equally at home singing the Haydn as she is to sing Elsa.
Yes.
And it's really extraordinary how she can go back and forth, and I love getting to see that switch, but the power is still the same.
Yeah.
And you two hold a lot of power during this process, because I know you said that Ern, you defer to Barron, you defer to Ern, but do you consider yourselves partners in crime, or is there a good cop, bad cop, or is it a Power Ranger situation where by our powers combined, Choral Collaborative will happen?
All of the above.
Yeah, it depends on what's going on. So there'll be situations where, I'm just like, this is not the standard, so I'll be saying. So I'm the bad cop and he's the good cop, because he can say, well, all you have to do is this. And then he gets to be the winner, and the kids love him. And they're like, he's so mean. Ernest is mean. And there are other times when I'm like, boy, that sounds pretty good. And Barron, yes, except sopranos, you are singing actually the alto note. And so we go back and forth. He is amazing. He's a beloved friend and a person who I admire so much that it's easy for me to defer to him when we have questions. It's also really, it's like training for me. So sometimes, this doesn't happen very much anymore, but sometimes in the early times, I've already conducted a piece. So I'll give him my score, and my score is carefully marked in the choral side. And so he'll look at it and be like, well, I do it this way, I do it, and so that we talk. Increasingly now, I check my markings and my score against what he creates for the teachers, just to make sure that we are on the same path.
So you're creating guides for the teachers before they begin.
Yeah, we provide them with a ton of resources because we want this to be as helpful and efficient as possible. But one of them is a marked piano vocal score, so they don't have to think about, well, where do we need to put the breaths, or are we going to really hold this to the full value? We prescribe all of that for them. And yeah, at the beginning, he would put a breath here and I would mark the breath there, and then sometimes we'd chat about it. But now, the more that's in the repertoire, some of it's already marked from previous iterations, but it's always good to go in and refresh.
I was gonna ask, do you, since we cycle through often like pieces over a certain number of years, does that mean that you are starting from a roadmap that you've used before, or do you prefer to kind of like crack open the score and act as if it's the first time and you're combing through it?
It's both. It depends on the piece. So we did Elijah, and I marked it in a certain way, and then over time I've decided to mark things in a different way. So after a number of years, Elijah came back, and I thought, is this the year that I'm going to start with a blank score and remark it? So it's the way I normally mark things now.
Yeah.
So this last year when we did it, that was the year. So I've got all these scores, and it's a big score, that have my old way of marking. And I don't know exactly what to do with them because I don't use that anymore. And so I took that opportunity to remark everything and to rethink how I think about it. So sometimes you take a piece and you redo it from scratch. Sometimes I'm so pleased with how the score is marked that I don't need to change that. I might change how I think about how to describe things to kids. One of the things that can feel very stiff when you're doing these masses is that the people don't know where the mass comes from. Or at least I'm not Catholic, so I just assumed the mass could be found in the Bible someplace. And so I thought, I wonder where that comes from. And then I realized that it doesn't actually come from the Bible. It's guys who wrote poetry and told these beautiful stories. So the mass is like a love story, but it feels sort of foreign because it's in a foreign language and because it's church.
It's very structured, and it's kind of odd to have something so firmly structured, like this is the progression of it.
Right. Or beautiful, depending on how you think about things. And so to me, it's just these beautiful poetic gestures that talk about really metaphysical, supernatural kind of things, but in very personal language. Like if you sit and translate directly from the Latin and really understand what's going on, and you realize these texts have been crafted by people for thousands of years in the very early part of a sect that might not have even survived. And if you can approach it from this storytelling aspect, it really helps the kids say the text with meaning. That's to me, and one of the reasons I love working with Barron is that we're both text guys. Like if it's text, that shapes everything. It shapes your countenance, it shapes how you think about what you're doing, and it shapes their ability to communicate to the audience, even though the audience I know doesn't speak Latin. But we sense on a subconscious level or subliminal level that real language is being spoken, that there's real intentionality in what the kids are saying. It's not just syllables, la, 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 going by.
Some of the pieces are easier for that to come across. Elijah, the kids grab onto the drama, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of swirling fires and all of this stuff. I mean, it's easy for the kids to be like, oh, this is a cool moment, and the orchestra writing is equally dramatic. Most of the requiems, right? The confutatis in Mozart, it's really easy for the students to grab onto. But then we have things that are just a little more, I think you said structure, just a little more boxed in, like the Haydn Mass, where you have to really think about the words seriously and why a classical composer who wrote this particular style that by today's standards would seem classical, old or boring, and how inventive it was at the time, especially given what the text is, because the meaning of the text is how Haydn came up with some of these fun gestures that's in it. So it's a little trickier this year with this kind of piece, which I think is why it's paired so wonderfully with the Illuminare, which has a little more of the graspable drama in it.
There is something really beautiful about how the mass text, for the most part, stays the same. Like if you say I'm writing a mass, then you are using these same parts and you use the same text, probably the same Latin, and yet everybody comes to it in an extraordinarily different way.
Yeah.
And I've just started this Eric Leinsdorf book, the Composer's Advocate, and it's wonderful. But one of the first things he says is you need to understand the language that is in the score and the composer's language, because if you refuse, or you just translate it into something else, if you refuse to see that there's nuance in the differences in how they use their words and how they translate it and how it's supposed to mean, if you refuse to see that, you'll miss so much of the composer's intention. And Haydn choosing to use Latin versus someone like Brahms, who he went back and I'm explicitly using German and I'm using the Lutheran Bible. And, Elaine Hagenberg going and sourcing very specific texts outside of the Mass. Like, these are deliberate choices. So how do you, like you said, with the kids, where do you even begin when you're walking into that classroom the first time and you're opening up Lord Nelson? Like, okay, here's what we're dealing with.
I mean, so it's so interesting to nerd out about the different settings of like Gloria through the ages. That was, I mean, grad school was for choral conductors in their master's and doctorate. That's all you're doing. You're comparing Kyrie to Kyrie to Kyrie, deciding how they're all different and which one's better. And you're planning your own funeral mass, and because you're going to have your perfect Kyrie and your perfect Gloria, and it's going to be all these different composers.
It's your death playlist.
Yes, like mashed together.
Awesome. For you, those are.
Well, the Kyrie is a C minor mass from Mozart. That's the best Kyrie. It's so good. There's no Gloria at a Requiem Mass, so you don't have to really stress about a Gloria.
Although it's your funeral, you can do what you want.
That's probably true. I don't know. I'll have to think about it more. But the kids don't necessarily have any of all the musicological background of any of that. To them, all classical music is classical music, regardless whether it's Romantic or 20th century or Impression. They don't even have the starting point to have that kind of a conversation. So what I always have to remind myself, their brains are still developing. It's still mush in there. And I think about it for me though, I had that earlier wow moment way before they did, where I got the privilege of being on the stage with Robert Shaw and the Atlanta Symphony and 1,000 singers, right? So I had a little more time to get my feet wet, and they're still having that moment. So it's maybe not the right time to say, but this is why this is so special. But at the same time, recognizing that you're planting the seeds for whatever future kind of learning that they want to do. So you drip in a little bit of what era are we in? If they know that there are differences in the eras, you're already a step ahead. Baroque versus classical versus whatever. So they're excited about that. If they know where that is in the historical context of the printing press or the Reformation or whatever it is, then you're even a further step ahead. So you kind of go school by school and figure out where these kids are in their musicological journey, so you can start to have these super fun, nerdy conversations about why a composer might have chosen a particular thing. Haydn was more fortunate than others. He had a stable of prose, like a literal stable, right, that the musicians slept in, and so he got to write for a cohort of people. Bach didn't care that every Sunday he just had whoever showed up to church, right? He just, and you have to know all these sort of nuances about history to get really excited about it. But for the kids, if you bring it back to the story they're telling, relate it to the same type of drama they do in musical theater, the same type of drama they're going through in their daily lives in high school, which we all went through, they start to grab onto those things. And then the seeds are planted for real affection later.
We were just in rehearsal yesterday, and one of the things that always works, and it's really exciting to see, is that instead of having the choir look at me and sing without intention, which happens, I have them split. This half looks at this half, so they look at each other. I'm like, tell each other. We were doing the Gloria, so Gloria in excelsis Deo. So they have to say it to each other like, wow, this is amazing conversation. And once they look at each other, they start smiling because they're embarrassed. But what's cool is that is the countenance we're looking for. Now we just have to flip the switch from embarrassed to, I'm celebrating something. There was another place where Benedicimus te, adoramus te. What's the one before?
Laudamus te.
Yeah, Laudamus te, we praise you. Benedicimus te, we bless you. Adoramus te, we adore you. And so I said to the kids, I want you to think about, I'm going to be your maestro of romance. If you're trying to tell somebody that you care a lot about them, 3 things that you really like about them, and that the last one is that you adore them, it's never going to work if you just sit in monotone without any emphasis. That's not going to work. You are not going to find romance. But I'm going to show you. So, laudamus te, benedicimus te, adoramus te. And so you hear them, and it's silly, but they can relate to that. And so you're taking words that are not even English, that have no inherent meaning to them. You're turning them into words as opposed to isolated syllables, and you're putting it in a context where, oh, I sort of get that. And they are happy to laugh at me, which I'm happy to do. And then it's so weird to listen to the shift in their singing and in their vocal production, and where it is, like everything shifts to the right place. Because we don't think about it, right? When you say, hey, I'm not thinking like, where am I placing this and all that kind of stuff. I do it because I have an intention in what I just said. I want to get your attention. It needs to go a certain distance. If I was trying to go across the street,
Right.
I wouldn't think like fortissimo with an accent. And you just say with intention what you're trying to do.
But there is a vulnerability there.
Mm-hmm.
There's I would say the difference between something I really admire with vocal soloists especially is often they just have to be out there on stage the whole time, whether or not they're actually singing. They just get to be parts there, and yet they can't look bored. They have to actually be actively engaged with the audience almost the entire. I mean, Michelle de Jong, when we did Das Lied von der Erde years back, it was unbelievable watching the way she held that audience in her hand, even as she sat for 20 minutes at a time waiting for her moment. And our solos have to do the same. I think there's a vulnerability in getting kids anyone to understand they have to look up and they have to engage, because otherwise it won't be as effective. So how do you get them to do that?
Well, I agree with you, but I also want to remind you that the double basses are also on stage the whole time, and we're watching your faces just as closely as we're watching the singers' faces.
And I try very hard to keep mine at a
just...
neutral.
It's a really great point, and the soloists are trained in it, right? Because they've either done Broadway or they've done opera, so they understand character. And even if it's just one of the quartet in the Haydn, which doesn't have a character assigned to it, they recognize that they are doing a presentation, and from the second they walk on the stage, they are that presentation. Even if the character they're playing is diva soprano soloist, right? They play that character and they sit like a soprano, which will sit very different from a baritone. And the baritone will do a nod every now and then. It's just a thing that baritones do. The baritone nod. The singers, the singers in the chorus have to be reminded. It's just like any training. You don't know you're not doing something or that you could do something better unless a mentor or what's the opposite of the apprentice? The master. So it sort of tells you, great, now try it this way. So they just need to be reminded that they are constantly on stage. And that example yesterday where they were singing at each other and they started smiling and it sounded better, then you hit pause and you say, okay, that feeling right there, that's the feeling you need to recreate, because they won't remember that tomorrow. They'll just think they had a silly moment in rehearsal unless you pause them and say, that's the feeling. Remind yourself of that feeling tomorrow and recreate it. And when you've got the music in front of you also, sometimes you just forget that the world is there because you're like reading a book. And no, people are watching you present this. And so you have to remind them constantly to look up out of the music.
And you can see his instrument shift. The moment so we have all these creases here. It's all wrong. And so the moment you do this, everything lines up. You can support your sound from your diaphragm. It's a technical necessity, but it also looks better.
Yeah, and one of the great, I have a community chorus also that I work with. One of the most effective things I ever did was show them a video of their own performance, where they just got to see what their faces and parts in their hair actually looked like, even though I'm harping at them a million times, but they don't see themselves because they're not looking at a mirror. And then they watch it and they're like, oh my gosh, boy, that one person is really giving a stellar performance and this other person is not, and they can do some compare and contrast.
It's hard to argue with a mirror.
It's hard to argue with a mirror. Now, one of the problems though is some of these choirs that we work with also have show choirs and they rehearse in the same room and there is a constant mirror. And so then you also get high school preening. Yes, there's a lot of high school preening when they're... And so Maestro will be saying something and I'll be like, time out. You look great. Can you listen to what's going on?
You look fabulous.
You look fabulous.
You mentioned the pause. How do you? I've noticed in so many rehearsals for this where there's just this moment of like incredible jubilation when something goes right. Like you make sure that you not only tell them they did it right, but that you practically sing it to the rafters that they did it right. Mm-hmm. And I do that to a much lesser degree when I teach, but it's just like you just go immediately up in arms, like that was fabulous, do it again. Do you feel like that is, have you learned to do that, or have you always just like that reward, that risk and reward?
That's an interesting question. I think that by the time I'm working with them, especially when you would see them, which would be in the big orchestra rehearsals, I so want that right moment so I can say, that's it. That it becomes instinctive and not something that I've practiced or thought about. But genuine excitement. Like every now and then, Barron's out in the house, and so he's hearing what it sounds like in the house for me. And so I'll turn around and be like, that's it, right? I said, yeah, that's it. So it's a tactical thing in that I'll often ask the kids, okay, that's exactly it. Does it feel different? Does it sound different? It's okay if it doesn't, because you might not recognize this at all. And so we have to really reinforce physically what they're doing when it's right, so that they can repeat that, because it's not like us where you get the angles right and suddenly it sounds right. It is a sense of physically I did this and that's the sound he's looking for, so now I know how to repeat it. I mean, that's tactical, but most of it is just I'm so excited.
I like the reward of it all. I mean, this is a long process. You mentioned earlier, this starts in August. They've been slogging through notes and rhythms on the same piece for months. And there's little moments of reward. The first mass rehearsal, even though it's in a high school auditorium where they all just get to sing with 100 friends, that could be the first time and maybe the only time after this project that they ever get to do something like that. That always is exciting for them. The first time in the hall is always exciting to them. The first time hearing the orchestra, the first time hearing the soloist. And so I think just when it finally sounds the way it's supposed to sounds somehow. The joyful combining of chorus and orchestra that we all love so much. It's just it's nice to pop a cork on that, and be like, good for you kids. Because I also think you illustrate or you reference this a lot when you're talking to them. Maybe the symphony players aren't necessarily interested in a high school project. They're interested in a choral orchestra masterwork with a chorus that rises to the level of the orchestra. And when the kids actually achieve that in those final rehearsals, it's hard not to be jubilant about that.
And the players recognize how hard the teachers have worked to get this to this level. And they see how hard we're working to help them get to that level. And they see that the kids are really respectful of what the players are doing. And a lot of times when we totally run out of metaphors, I'll just say, I want you to listen to the cellos, or I want you to listen to the strings, or listen to the brass. I want you to listen to the orchestra, because they are doing what I need you to do. And the orchestra is perfectly reasonable in their understanding that we need them. They are why we're there. And they are the ultimate sonic reinforcement of what we're asking the kids to do. And I love this orchestra because it's willing to do it. And there have been times where, like with the downbeat, the orchestra's playing, the kids just aren't even singing. And everybody's a little bit worried about that, but they sense that the kids and the teachers have prepared them, are in this game. And they give us the time and they give us the patience and the support. And by the time the concert is complete and everybody's very excited, lots of the players will come up to me, but more importantly, they'll say it to the kids. They'll say, we really appreciate what you guys did. That was really great. And it's incredible when high school kids, when a standard is placed before them, and the standard is the professional orchestra, and they gradually rise to that standard just because they're in that presence. And it couldn't happen any other way. You have to have the standard there. And they rise to it. And when it's over, you almost can't believe it. And what's really crazy is, regardless of the music, Brahms Requiem, Lord Nelson Mass, Mozart Requiem, whatever, when we come back and meet with the choir after the concert's over, it's like we're rock stars. It's the most amazing thing, and everybody wants you to sign their music. One of the things that we do is we make sure the kids have their own copy of the piece so that they can have people sign it. They have a physical reference point of the concert. And even when we come into the schools, I mean, here we are bringing music of Haydn or Brahms or whoever, and we're coming in, they're so pumped about this experience. It's like, it gives you hope.
It's such a there's so much about this job that brings joy, but sometimes you need the reminder.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have a project where you know the choir has been literally working for months, and you can feel like the palpable feeling of victory, of triumph, of having achieved that, is so infectious. And that's why I think my ultimate favorite thing is watching you for the first choir entrance of like whatever piece we're doing, because you just kind of like open up and look up, and like this horde of high school students are looking back, and you can just feel them like pulling it in and getting ready to unleash. And it is the reminder that we all hopefully had that moment where it's like we found the thing, the Mahler 8, the E flat, the 4-year-old in church, these tremendous sparks of like, oh, I could do this forever.
Mm-hmm.
Last question from me. What surprises you? What still surprises you some 20 years into this?
I think so I'm addicted to sound, right? I'm addicted to the sound of an orchestra. I'm addicted to the sound of a choir. I'm addicted to it. I just freely admit it. And so when what you have in your imagination happens for the first time, it's still overwhelming. There was a place, what's the first thing the choir sings in Elijah?
Help us.
Help us.
Yeah.
Right. Help, Lord. And so we were working and they got to get the H early, and that's HL is hard to do, and you got to get to the S sound quickly, and that's got to be on the downbeat. It's a lot. And it needs to sound desperate. And one time, it was like, in fact, it was in the concert itself, it finally exploded. I'm like, holy cow, that is why I'm in this business. It was just so exciting, and you have to like keep going because you want to just stop and say, whoa, can't do that. And I think it reminds me of the first time we did Choral Collaborative in the hall, in our new hall, which was 20 years, right? But 20 years ago, I guess, whenever it was. First time we did it in the hall, and we do the O Fortuna, the first entrance of the choir in the Orff. And so, boom, oh, and I hear this unbelievable sound, because even though they're high school voices, there's still like 400 of them singing this one thing in the right place. So it's still surprising to me how emotional I feel just by the sounds I'm hearing. It's still, and I love it. And you would think, when will I get used to it? Maybe never, and that's what I hope.
Mine is not as joyful. I'm always surprised that it happens. I'm always surprised that we make it. There are moments where you're like, oh my gosh, we haven't heard any choir sing this particular section well yet. And we know that maybe this choir is going to help this choir. And it's never the same mix of choirs, so you never have the same sort of players and this choir's all-star bass section all went to college, and so now you don't have the same foundations anymore. It's just constantly recrafting, and there comes moments where you're like, is this really is this what? But they never stop working. They never fail to see whatever that end goal is and wherever the standard is, and they just make their way to it. I'm always surprised that we've never stopped a concert and said, well,
start again.
Let's but we tried, and then everyone just leave. But I think that's some of the students, the fanboying at afterwards is just relief. Holy cow. And just to see the sense of accomplishment on their own face, and that like everybody's kid plays YMCA soccer, and then it gets to JV, and then it gets to varsity, and then maybe they get a college scholarship, and 1% of those people go on and play professionally. So that maybe is the case for this huge choir. You might get 4 people out of 400 that turn into musicians at a professional level. But what you've created are those Mahler 8 memories for everybody along the way. So now you have sports fans at every level, and whether they make it through college or whether they make it through JV, or even make it into high school, you now have these music fans that have these seminal moments to draw back on for the rest of their lives.
And I still have people come up to me, whether I'm at a restaurant or something, and people will come up and say, "You probably don't remember me, but I was in Choral Collaborative at 1999.
Yeah.
We did whatever it was," and they have very specific memories of that, and they'll tell you those stories. And I think that we originally talked about like, why did we start? And the whole thing is connecting the sound of the symphony orchestra to our specific community. I don't know if this thing is replicable anywhere else. I describe it to my colleagues who are kind of interested in it, and I'm like, you're looking at, I can reduce a 20-year investment to a 10-year investment, but you're looking at 10 years for this thing to actually become what you guys are able to do at this level. And somebody has to say, well, 10 years from now, I think it's worth it. And we didn't actually have to do that because we were inventing it as we went along. It just takes that much time. But what a testament to an organization that the resources keep going into this program until it gets to this point. It's really amazing.
There's a good deal of faith that has to go into all of it. And
Yes.
I think if you didn't have to have faith for a project, it's probably not big enough.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you both so very much. It has been a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you.
That was so good. That was so great. Thank you. Oh my God. Whew. 2:30 on the dot.
There you go.